Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here for the start of spring. It's arrived. And just a bit of housekeeping. There's going to be a QR code that comes up on there, which you can scan, and then you can ask questions that way at the end. I'm also told to remind you of the social media handles, and let me check what they are. At Currency Press, Playwrights Fest, and at Currency Press. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're here on Gadigal land. Actually, we're on Gadigal water, so I pay my respects to elders past and present. We're on the waterways that we were told last night of the significance of the whale to the Gadigal in these waters. I also think of scenes from Paul Irish's book, Hidden in Plain Sight, of the canoes that were dotting this part of the water. They were so ingenious that they had the campfires on the canoes to cook the fish. And right from the start of the colony, they were used for both for commerce and an exchange of wisdom of this is how you fish here. But they were also misunderstood, and sometimes that wisdom was overlooked. And they were seen as flimsy craft. But right here off Dawes Point or Tara, they were also used for warriors, as swift vessels for stealthy attacks to resist the colonists. That idea of to repel or to engage is debated in the most remarkable play by one of our panellists, The Visitors. Jane Harrison has come to us today from Ballarat. You're probably the furthest afield to the festival today. You're a Murrawari playwright. Your works include The Extraordinary Stolen, The Visitors, of course, and your book that was nominated for a Prime Minister's Literary Award. Remind me of the title of that one.
Becoming Kirralie Lewis.
It's so great to have you on the panel here. We've also got Anthony Blair. Anthony Blair is an agent and happens to be my agent for the last 25 years. We will be testing client-agent confidentiality today on the stage. Anthony is a company director at Cameron's Management, and you represent writers, directors, stage designers, and book publishing. That's right? All of that. So it'll be great also in this conversation to speak about the practicalities and the business side and the pathways for Australian plays on the international stage. And one of the biggest brains in the biz, is that me? It might be my earring.
Me.
What's you? Is Tom Wright. Tom, you have given me some of the most lasting, stark images on the stage. I think of the beautiful mayhem of Lost Echo, your collaborations with Barry Kosky. You're known as an adapter of work and a translator, and your deep knowledge of those works and your respect for them, I think, allows you such playful anarchy as well. Your list of works is enormous. I'm thinking of Picnic at Hanging Rock, Black Diggers, This Is a True Story, The Lost Echo, of course, The Women of Troy, The War of the Roses, and you've got Troy opening at Malthouse in September. Today, we're going to talk about the global and the local, and the universal and the specific. I think I might start just thinking about the local first. And Jane, you're a playwright that stands out for that connection to the political context around the theatre when we're seeing the work. When I saw Stolen at Belvoir some years back, that day the Sydney Morning Herald's headlines corresponded with what was on the stage. We're immersed in the human story, but so aware of that political context. When I saw The Visitors, it was the Friday, the evening before the Voice referendum. I wonder if you could just reflect on that experience of being of that production, maybe in particular, for you and the others involved to feel that connection to the moment.
That's interesting because The Visitors took 11 years to get to the stage. So
Yeah.
I didn't write it with the referendum in mind, but it happened to coincide with it as, life imitating art and
Isn't that extraordinary?
art imitating life. So It was quite extraordinary that the last night of the visitors at the Opera House coincided with the referendum, and the cast elected not to hear about the results before they went on stage. I think it would have been devastating for them, because the play is a lot about voice, and so. You know, when I write, I try to do something, not a historical play. It has to have a resonance now. It has to be relevant now to our world. And so it is a play about the 26th of January. It was 1788, one day in our calendar. But I wanted to make it relevant to an audience now.
Yeah. And so what about, so Stolen has been seen overseas. How does that specific context, when you shift that context, what happens? What's gained or what's lost?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You think, will the Japanese audience respond to Stolen, particularly in English, when it was presented in 2002 as part of the Tokyo Festival? But I had one woman come up to me at the end of the show and say through the translator that she was touched in her heart because the story meant so much to her. And I said, she said, because I too am a minority. And I said through the translator, what minority is she? Because I knew there were Ainu people in Japan, and I've met some of those people at the production. And she said, I thought she said, I'm a thespian. And I thought, oh, well, theatre's not huge in Tokyo, but it's hardly a minority.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
And then I realised she'd said I'm a lesbian.
Ah.
And so I hugged her. And, you know, for her, the experience of seeing something where you're othered and, you know, rejected by society, that resonated with her. So, you know, again, the universality of the story touched her.
And what about the other First Nations experiences that you would have had a window into? Could you reflect on that?
Definitely. Wherever, especially colonised countries, wherever the play has been shown or had readings, like in Canada, there's that, you know, shared trauma of colonisation. And strangely enough, Stolen hasn't gone to New Zealand, but, you know, they've got a slightly different experience of colonisation.
Were you involved in a production in Canada, though? Was that...
it had a reading in Canada. It didn't have a production there. So it's had readings in the United States. It had a show in Hong Kong, Japan, and toured the UK as well.
And how does it work? Are there limits to... Say, for example, have you had productions where there has been an international production, so international actors or a director take on the work? Well, could that happen? With those sort of
well, in Japan, in fact, it did.
Right.
It had bookended the Tokyo Festival. It had a production in with the Australian actors performing at the end, but it had a Japanese production at the start. So Wada Yoshio from Wesley can correct me, Retanden.
Oh, Wesley's here. I'm glad I was so praising of your productions. That's good. Hello.
He championed Australian plays, in particular First Nations plays, and so he did a production in Japanese, and I attended that production.
Right.
So it was extraordinary. The cast was much better dressed than the Australian production. They had matching handbags and shoes.
Oh, fantastic.
Wasn't quite in the keeping with the themes of the play, but...
How was it contextualised for them? Or was it? Did they...
Yeah, look, I'm not sure. I think, you know, again, Japan has its Ainu people, and the Japanese aren't terribly knowledgeable about the history of how those people were treated, and there's a lot of similarities. But strangely enough, the Koreans also perhaps marginalised in Japan, and so Koreans who were also part of the production the story resonated with them as well.
Thank you. Last night there was a keynote address and you were there, Jane, by Geordie Shea, and the question was about what is an Australian play. And that might also be interesting just to briefly touch on as a bit of context. Like, for a long time, Anthony, I'm going to ask you a question because I know both professionally but also personally, you're probably in a theatre more than most of us, and you've seen Australian plays across a long period of time. There was that obsession with belonging, that plays were helping us tell us who we were as a nation. Do you think that's still how we're engaging with Australianness on the stage? Or has it shifted?
Okay. Well, yes, I think so. I think obviously the scope of the sort of sense of belonging is broadened, and the plays are reflecting a much more diverse group of writers and
Yes.
and a bunch of stories. But I think that preoccupation absolutely continues.
So it's about who's belonging maybe, or who is invited to tell those stories. I think that's actually the point that Geordie was making last night. That idea of actually, I think I have a quote from him. Did I write it down? He said, "We carry our communities, our cultures, our histories. For many of us, it's a push and pull. We toil with this fabulous art form, walking into theatres and wondering whether we belong, whether our stories belong. Maybe an Australian play is exactly that, a constant balancing act between belonging and not belonging, between being heard and not being heard." And obviously his speech was a lot about that cultural perspective. Tom, you described to me a false binary, though, that used to exist between the internationalist and the new Australian. Are we beyond telling stories about who we are?
No, we're not. But yes, and you're right to characterise it as a false binary, Tommy. I guess what I was alluding to is that when I was a young writer, it felt like the two predominant tribes in contemporary Australian playwriting were between those who felt a great urge to write stories of belonging or lack of belonging, because the question of our legitimacy as a colonising culture was the dominant destabilising force in all our lives, and the prevalence of white dominant, usually male voices at that time telling nationalist stories to one part of the tribe felt appropriate. Whether they're middle class stories set in North Shore living rooms around couches, or whether they're narratives delving into those of dispossessed people, the one thing they had in common was, we will tell Australian stories for Australian audiences. It's time we took responsibility, spoke for ourselves. But then there was a smaller, but in some ways equally as influential group who said, actually Australia is part of the world, and the solution to our quandary and our destabilisation is to embrace being part of that world.
Right.
And to take note of what is happening in theatre around the world, to tell stories not just from our own hearth and kitchen table, but from all over the place. And I found myself, because of my over-education, in that latter camp, because you sort of, we act as if we're individualist determined, but actually fundamentally a lot of decisions are made for you. You find yourself channeled into certain things. I think that binary, insofar as it ever really existed, it's completely contestable, has utterly dissolved now. I think we've moved into a point now where we're no longer so anxious about actually what constitutes Australian.
Yes.
Because it's become such a problem. It's the wrong question.
Because we feel legitimised now. Is that
No.
No? Right.
No,
Okay.
quite the opposite.
Okay.
It's to do with the referendum we were discussing earlier. It's to do with the failure of a whole range of issues. It's to do with technology and the reach of globalisation. The generations that came after me in terms of writing, the issue of their Australianness and the big question, how Australian is it, is not as relevant as whose voice is being privileged or whose voice is being heard, what kind of stories are we privileging as opposed to others. And so Australian plays came to resemble more and more, a play produced in Brisbane resembled a play in Baltimore as much as it resembled a play in Sydney. And so the globalisation landed on us. We didn't choose to do that. The form shifted around us, I think. And I, for one, welcome that, because I found the old debates, like we need to be doing more new Australian writing, always felt like a sheltered workshop to me.
That's great. And on that, I think that if we're talking maybe about form, it's the how we tell the stories, or the who is telling the stories. Jane, do you feel that given that we're able to deal with the bigger conversations around the world in a different way, or?
That's a big question. I don't know whether I feel qualified to answer that question.
What about your personal experience, though?
I think, we're all human beings. I think fundamentally it comes down to that. And so we all feel the same range of emotions. And so I think that's what theatre does best. It taps into those set of emotions. And I love it when something that's so specific, say about the stolen generation, resonates with someone who would think that they didn't have a relationship to that story.
Yes.
I remember a Q&A after Stolen one day, and a woman got up and said, I know how they feel because I left my baby with a babysitter for the first time. And then she got embarrassed because how could she compare the experience of having your child removed forever to leaving it with a trusted babysitter?
Yeah.
But I was pleased because she suddenly, that barrier between what was happening on stage and Aboriginal people in particular was dissolved. She could relate to it on a human level. So I think, any play, Susie Miller's plays that taps into human emotions has the potential for a worldwide audience.
Yes, but something happens to those plays, I guess, with the shift of those contexts. I'm going to ask this to everyone in a way, actually. Do you think your Australianness actually matters? What about from the business side of things? Do they care?
Well, my experience is often that there's not that much interest
Right.
in an Australianness, I hate to say. And I suppose I've schlepped around to London and New York and various places many times with my, plays in my, my wares to sell and to talk about and to sort of gain interest. I mean, yes, sometimes there's interest in particular plays that have gone very well commercially or critically, but
Bit of celebrity help sometimes?
bit of celebrity help sometimes, and if there's there's a bunch of reasons why a play is going to be of interest in those markets, but
Didn't Madonna at one point pick up one of your clients' plays?
she did, yes, yes, in early noughties, in the early 2000s, she did, and I think that was because there was a great sort of star vehicle
Yep.
in David's play.
But with that production, the Australianness was not a part of it.
No,
It was reset.
It was a reset. So
Yeah.
quite a lot of the time those plays are being reset or shifted slightly. But I find there's a sort of, quite often in New York in particular, a sort of profound disinterest.
Right.
I hate to say, sort of in Australianness. And of course there's, exceptions to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's sobering, but later in this
And
conversation...
most recently, terrific exceptions,
Yeah.
But
Well, let's return to those pathways later in the conversation. That's really interesting. Tom, when you've worked in Germany, Korea, Pakistan, elsewhere, does your Australianness matter?
Thanks, Tommy. There was a production of one of my works, Lorelei, in Karachi some time ago, and I was horrified when I received my English language version of the program to see myself described as a British playwright.
Right.
And so I rang up the hall, the artistic centre in Karachi, and said, "Look, I'm an Australian." And the response, this is not word perfect, but the response was, "To our audience, it's pretty much the same."
And is that freeing?
No, it was sobering. It wasn't freeing, but it is actually quite useful to be reminded that for a large part of the world, and an increasingly important part of the world, white men with names like mine, British, Australian, South African, whatever, you're all the same.
Right.
Fundamentally, there's a complete lack of interest. And these national identity codes are things that, in answer to your earlier question, this room right now is where it matters most.
Right.
And the further out we get, like ripples on a pond, the less it matters. Right. Audiences increasingly, a large section of them, aren't really interested in necessarily how Australian is it. I think it's a 20th century question.
Right.
I really think Australian identity is actually something that is now transmogrified into a set of questions as opposed to a core question. Because arguably, or maybe, this is just a posit, maybe what happened was the people who are always asking that question about what constituted new Australian writing was a self-serving machine, just constantly looking after itself.
What do you mean by that?
That was a playwriting industry, which was to define that the Australian play needed to be about rue and olive, and it needed to have certain class assumptions, white Australian assumptions about what constituted national voice, what Australianness was tied in with a whole lot of ideas that went back to the 1890s rural movement. I'm talking about the kind of plays that, like Touch of Silk, or going all the way through Brumby Innes and coming through until we got to plays like Summer of the 17th Doll. And Summer of the 17th Doll mattered a great deal in rooms like this. But by the time it hits the global marketplace of ideas, it's Ernest Borgnine and it's just banal humanism.
Right.
And that's what happens to a lot of our work. Its cultural specificity glimmers for a brief moment in time in the salons of Melbourne and Sydney, but it's like an ice cube on a frying pan in the world, gone.
Is that
It's
your
not
experience,
really
Jane?
lasting. Well, Jane's lucky because she's one of the exceptions.
I was going to say.
Well, I think, again, it's this very specificity. I think there's a fascination, like when we took the play to London in 2000 for the Heads Up Centenary Federation, there was huge interest in the story of the stolen generations from the British media. So we were in every newspaper, we were interviewed in every newspaper and on radio and everything like that. Like the depth of the questions there were much more, intense than here in Australia. So, they're reckoning with their colonial past as well.
What about the way we talk about craft and form? Like, do you ever find that narrow? I mean, is that ever, does that ever sound to you that might be colonial in the way that we talk about the making of the plays? Is that something that you have to resist?
These questions, Tommy.
Well, I'm just,
so
I guess I just want to know about another
Shallow.
writer's craft. I mean, I'm always interested in that. I actually want to know how you organise your desk and your day, actually, if you get down to it. But
I'm disorganised. I have ADHD. So.
I do, right. I need like a coloured notebook that belongs to that project and rituals that get me into it. But I just noticed, like, when we talk about craft a lot, sometimes that craft and the way we speak about it, the rules of the game, if you like, are something that are sometimes receiving from a Hollywood industry as well. The idea of of what good structure is, and your play, I guess, what I enjoy about it is that it does seem liberated from that in its
That's because
form.
I didn't know what I was doing. I was a novice when I wrote Stolen, so it took 6 years to get to the stage, but I hadn't written a play before. I'd hardly been to the theatre before that. And they asked me not to do a straight narrative, so I drew on my advertising experience and wrote 30-second scenes throughout and just pulled them together. And then
Amazing.
we found that it had, working with Wesley, we found it had a natural narrative arc to it. But yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, and I think that's that was my formula, really.
There's a great power in that to discover it.
Freedom.
Yeah, fantastic. Could you just tell us a bit more about that process then of how the play was discovered, and has that then informed all of your? I mean, I guess the form of The Visitors is similar in a way, is it?
Well, The Visitors drew heavily on 12 Angry Men because I had a writing residency at Monash Uni, and I had 3 months to write the play, and I'd been thinking about it for years, but I took the structure of 12 Angry Men and then I tried to actually get permission to adapt it, but they wouldn't give me permission to do that, even though there had been adaptations of that story. And so I knew that I had to rewrite every word in it so I didn't get accused of plagiarism.
Yeah.
So I did that. I sat down and I rewrote it, but I cast it in my mind with Aboriginal actors that I knew. And so once I had those actors in mind, I could write for those characters.
Amazing. Tom, you're the artistic associate at Belvoir. You're around the development of plays a lot. Do you ever think the way that we talk about form in this country is too narrow, or are you seeing that a shift at the moment in the way we think about it?
Well, it's horses for courses, isn't it? And most companies and most festivals and most organisations in Australia serve an audience, and an audience is a vital part of this conversation. So for a company like Belvoir, which is a humanist stage, and beloved, and it's been established and has a deep relationship with community, the question of form is secondary to the question of content. Whereas if you were a festival director, you'd probably be thinking more about form ahead of content, I would suggest. What it comes down to, though, is maybe the idea, which is about globalisation versus localisation, and it's Belvi's part of that conversation, is to what extent a play is actually a moment where actors, writers and audience come together for a shared moment, and to what extent it's a tradable commodity. Because this is the nub of it for a professional writer, is that you can be someone who's trying to write a tradable commodity like a Hollywood film script. Here's my play. It could be set anywhere like some plays can. Madge loves it in London, but she wants to set it in sort of Notting Hill. Bang, everything's transposable. At that point, the play has entered into what Jonathan Miller called its afterlife. And Jonathan Miller's distinction is really useful here, I think, is that when you write a play, and you write it, at least in my case, always for a specific stage, always for a specific director, and always for a specific set of audience and performers. Like, I can't just write speculatively. I don't understand people who can do that. I think that's writing a commodity. If you're just writing a script, it feels like it's a commodity that needs to be traded, and before you know it, you're not in control of that process.
Yes.
But if you are privileged enough to be writing for a specific set of circumstances, then you can actually start the process. But that opening night and that first season is what Jonathan Miller calls its life. That's when it's most alive, when it's serving its purpose, when it's actually telling the story about what's going on. Your play, Packer and Sons, a moment in time with an audience in time. But then, first season shuts down, goes into everybody's drawers, and then someone chooses to revive it if it's good enough. That's what
They
happens.
haven't. It's still in the drawers.
Yes. But some people are lucky enough to get their plays revived. But that's what Jonathan Miller calls the afterlife.
Yeah.
And when a play goes into its afterlife, it actually doesn't become your property anymore, or the property of the original set of circumstances. It becomes something communal. Now, I'm not talking legalistically here. I'm not interested in the marketplace. I'm interested in the intellectual idea of it, is that actually the play no longer belongs to you and becomes something else.
Have you been involved with those second international productions on your plays?
Constantly.
And how do you adapt? How do you be responsive to that?
It's humbling, and it gives you focus, and it gives you perspective. When in Sweden they do Picnic at Hanging Rock, you just go, why? What on earth?
Is that your program note?
No. My program note is good on you, Stockholm. Go for it.
Yeah, right.
Seriously, it's like. But all I'm getting at is Joan Lindsay's 1960s postmodern text of a nascent nation, of proto-feminism and a whole range of other narratives intersected with contemporary post-dramatic theatre practices, whatever. That text had a specific purpose when it was done in the early part of this century in Melbourne. What it means, and it's played all over the world. What it means in Stockholm or Bremen, I can't pretend to know, let alone in Mumbai. I have no idea. The photographs are kind of astonishing. Just to see an Indian, a cast of contemporary Indian performers dressed as Miranda and...
In language? Do they translate it?
In English, in that case, but it has been translated.
Yeah.
It's had non-English language versions. And all I'm getting at, though, is that you're not in control of your script, and that way madness lies. If a playwright seeks to try and stay in control of the afterlife of their scripts. Now, obviously, there's copyright, there's a whole range of legal determinants.
Yeah.
I'm talking emotionally.
Well, Anthony,
At a certain point,
see
you gotta let it go.
About holding the man, I want to put a question to you. How have you found holding the man in the various places it's been?
Well, I'm lucky. It's had a really long life. I mean, there's this production, an independent production happening this year in the UK. It's had a long life. So it's I don't know. It's always fascinating. There's been one translation in Italian, and I didn't go. I kicked myself for not going because they were going to remount it, and then the pandemic happened. So I didn't get to see it in another language. But with that, like Tim's book, it's always so beautiful to see the way that people connect with that. And I think that's the power of Tim's specificity, the fact that he writes this memoir in a way that you can project your own life onto it, even if you are, South American, you're not queer, whatever. Like all these, I used to get emails and messages on Instagram of people that have found the work and are able to sort of see their own life in it. And that universality is him. So that it does I don't know, I think it also makes you grow as a writer a little bit. But what about this business side with the you look after writers, you're sometimes protecting them to have seek control over that afterlife. Do you ever have to tell them to get out of the way?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, they
Feel
sometimes.
free.
Yeah, there's sometimes they need to get out of the way, but I mean, all the different writers have different levels of wanting to protect it. I mean, some writers are just happy to just be very pleased to have a license organised and send me the money.
Yeah.
But usually they want to be involved. I mean, we want to know who's directing it and what they've done, and connect the writer with the director in particular, and have some sense of who the cast might be and what they've done.
And sometimes these are amateur and independent productions, aren't they? I mean, that's probably a huge part of how Australian work is actually being, I mean, in my experience, there's lots of amateur and independent productions as well as the professional ones.
Sure. With the amateur, there's less sort of, it's just too practically difficult to, connect writers with every director of an amateur production and stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, certainly they can't change the script and things like that. Yeah.
They do seek permission.
They seek permission regularly, and sometimes it's extraordinary the types of changes people are wanting to make.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of fix up the stage directions a little bit to say, don't turn off the lights and bring on furniture, and we all want to get home.
No, we had someone the other day send, someone overseas wanted to change a script, and they'd marked up the whole script and basically rewritten the whole thing, and about half of it was changed. So that was an easy.
Was it good?
That was an easy no.
Well, it wasn't
no, I
good.
did read. It was terrible.
All right.
I spared my client to have to go through the agony of reading this rewrite.
But there is value in surrender to it at times as well, obviously.
Occasionally, I mean, it really is a priority.
Not from you're protecting, I guess. It's not from
I'm
your point of
protecting,
view.
but
Yeah.
it's up to the writer to decide. But there are these. I wonder too what people sometimes in places around the world, what they're seeing in particular plays. I don't know what a Turkish audience are seeing in Barry Creighton's double act, this sort of Noel Coward-esque, witty, fabulous two-hander. But they love it, and people are wanting to do it
they're buying
there.
tickets.
But that's their problem. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
That's their problem. Like if you're foolish enough to program my play, then it's up to you to generate meaning. But that's, I guess, my point is that meaning's generated on the stage, not on the page. Mm-hmm. And that's obviously a facile thing to say in one way. But I actually, in another part of me, believes it is that we don't write these kind of things chiseled in granite on the top of Mount Sinai, as I say all the time. We don't write the truth. We write pretexts. What those of us who write plays do is they're not the real text. The real text is what the actors are saying on stage in any given night. Again, I know it's banal, but we just have to say it over and over because, as I say, otherwise what we're doing is trading in the commodity of the script. But the real interchange between human beings, between cultures, between societies, between nations is what actually happens once the lights go down. And that is genuinely interesting to me. And as the years have gone by, I'm less and less anxious about this stuff. I used to be very prescriptive about this, and so and for my sins now, 4 to 5 times a week, in comes an email. Such and such school in Milton Keynes want to do your plays. All right, if we do it with all boys? No, simple. No. I wrote it for women. It's for women's voice.
Right.
But then, as Anthony says, sometimes the question is, maybe.
Why not? Yeah.
And I'm getting more and more to that end, which is, do you know what? If you're foolish enough to do it, make it work for you.
Yeah.
But I'm returning to your earlier question, Tommy. How important is your Australianness is a problematic question.
Well, but I wonder if it's kind of inescapable, but about the meaning and sort of what is kind of hard-baked into the work. I guess I'm talking about point of view. And like, as we know, our workplaces are global, that they're remote. You can work from anywhere. And it's easier, I guess, with travel at that moment as well, also to engage with the world in that way. But theatre is fundamentally local. Theatre is fundamentally about people gathering in a space. So it's always local. So I feel like that question of point of view, like the vision from where you stand is contained in the work. I don't know if you can ever escape that DNA in it. I have this theory because I'm working on a film that is an American set story with Justin Kurzel. We have successfully convinced Screen Australia that American story should be made here. And there's a an economic reason to say, well, it creates jobs, that's a good thing. But actually, I think it's a creative thing that there is an Australian perspective on those characters, what the film, the way it laughs at authority, the ratbag characters. There's an Australianness, I think, in its point of view, which will be valuable, I think. So maybe what I'm getting to is like, how from this Australian perspective, from a smaller nation, do we critique the big powers? And is that a useful perspective? Do you think so, Jane? That from that your Australianness, that the fact that maybe we don't matter over here, there's a power in that, perhaps.
I'm always writing for Aboriginal audience predominantly, so
Yep.
I leave out things that probably explain the context of the story I'm telling, because I think the Aboriginal audience already understands that. So I'm already, my point of view is different from
Yes.
a wider point of view in terms of telling those First Nations stories so that a First Nations audience can relate to it, and it is extraordinary when we get a predominantly First Nations audience in there, that the permission to laugh, for example, you talked about humour.
Yeah.
My plays have humour in them, which, they're about the stolen generations and colonisation and living on the fringe of society. Where's the humour in those topics? But it's woven in there, and I think, that gives it a fundamentally First Nations kind of point of view to the story I'm telling.
I think what we laugh at is a really important part of this conversation, and that is about a relationship with power. And often I've noticed in conversations with international directors, there's a big part of the conversation that is about tone, that can be surprising from abroad, like that, and also the way that I think there is a collision of tones as well. I mean, I love that when something is making us cry, but then making us laugh in the next breath, that perhaps that is something that we do well. But I do think it's about a relationship with power, a critique of power. Do you find that plays generally that you're seeing at the moment, local plays, are we critiquing power here enough? How do you feel?
I think there's still certain stories that aren't being told. I mean, we're a predominantly multicultural society. Where are the African plays? Where are the Sudanese stories on stage? There's still not enough Indian stories on stage. We're not reflecting our makeup as people who are basically, first generation or second generation immigrants to this country. And I think, that's about audience as well. Are we bringing those audiences to our theatres, and making it part of their, when I tell people, I tell the taxi driver I'm a playwright, there's often silence. They don't know what a playwright is or does, or what role they have in society. And so, I think in terms of power dynamics, I think there's still hierarchies in the theatre world that need to be dissolved before we start truly reflecting our society.
Yeah. Tom, could I get you to reflect on that? Maybe even with reference to some of the ways that Belvoir is engaging with the world at the moment. Scenes from a Climate Era is about, will have a production. That's a play that was developed at Belvoir and will now have a production in London. Is that an example of how an Australian view can critique power globally?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that Scenes from a Climate Era addresses a global set of concerns, which is that we're not, there isn't an impending climate crisis, we're inside a climate crisis, and the play seeks to, in that community building model you alluded to earlier, create in any given room a set of urgencies. But what's interesting about the London production, which is still in rehearsals, is that, as reported back by the actors in the room, is that questions which that play felt very culturally specific about the nature of our ongoing relationship to water, ownership of water, management of water, the way in which water intersects with seasons and so on, in London doesn't feel as urgent. And so in London, that play is already starting to feel more of a commentary upon global realpolitik and that the impossibility of coming to a climate agreement. Whereas here it was a more emotional production about trying to speculatively imagine what it would be like to live in this continent in an age of increasing sort of weather events and so on.
Yep.
So there's that aspect. And then picking up Jane's point about the kind of what Australia might be able to give to the world as a multicultural society and so on. Yeah, we're in the very nascent stages of that, and I can only speak for the company I currently work at, but the diversity of that audience at Belvoir Street over the last 10 years is extraordinary. And the movement is an ongoing one. It's not a finished product, but as more and more works, particularly in our case by the Asian diaspora, are presented year after year, more and more people are buying season packages, and they're not just seeing Asian Australian stories, whatever they are, they're seeing whatever the company has to offer, because that's the movement. You might come to the theatre to see yourself reflected back at you. That might be the way you find your way into the theatre, but you stay in the theatre to learn something about someone else. And it's the same as dealing with young writers. When I teach young writers, you just see it over and over again, and it's true in all communities. Your first play is about you. Quite often your second and third play is about you. Your fourth play is about your grandmother and her stories. And that, you know,
Exactly what I did. That's
yeah,
exactly
no,
right.
we've all done it. Like there's no purity here. But your fifth play, you start to write about other people.
Yeah.
And you actually start to exercise the imagination, and your inner child comes out. And if you're lucky enough to get to a fifth, sixth or seventh play, at that point you actually start to write for the world. Now the world starts as Walsh Bay, and then might even stretch out to Darlinghurst and Surrey Hills. But again, if you're good enough and if you're lucky enough, it might actually start to resonate elsewhere and build communities and so on. But everybody's in the same boat. The trouble is, so many of the stories, and there will be Sudanese Australian stories, South Sudanese, but what we've learned as an industry is if you rush it, you get paternalistic and condescending. You've got to allow communities to find their own pace at which they want to tell their stories and for whom.
And that really concerted effort that I've seen at Belvoir and other companies to welcome people into the theatre, to normalise coming into the theatre and extend that invitation.
Enormous amount of work.
Deep engagement with the community.
It's all the more important. But again, this is an interesting question, because a lot of what determines Australia and what it is to be Australian might not have been recognisable to previous generations. And I'm just very cynical about the entire thing. I mean, Barry Humphries summed it up best when he said, as he did so many things, Anthony, Australia is the Brisbane of the world. No, that you're taking that as a criticism or the implicit. It's actually a celebration, because if you think about what Brisbane does inside Australia in terms of being a powerhouse for independent thought, for some of the finest bands, for being a place which is actually largely independent in its making and practice, it's been resistant to global trends.
It's punk.
It's all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's also, obviously being Barry Humphries, there's a satirical edge to it as well, is that fundamentally, if you're sitting in these centres of cultural power, the Los Angeles and Londons and so on, Australia is best exemplified by Kath and Kim. But they see that as an anthropological document. We see Kath and Kim as a gentle postcard to our grandparents' generation. They see it as an anthropological document. For them, it's fascinating that because they are invited by us to laugh at us, which is a sign of a mature society. Insecure societies are deeply worried about the rest of the world and what they think, the cultural cringe, and we're only just in the very early stages of only just beginning to say, do you know what? Go for it, laugh at us, we're the Brisbane of the world.
I want to talk about the practical ways that we take the Brisbane of the world globally. Anthony, tell me, just as an agent, like what effort does it take to establish those relationships and find the opportunities for Australian plays abroad?
The Brisbane of the world reminds me, I have a client who's very funny about this. She thinks when she goes to London and has meetings, she feels like a Thracian from Thrace.
That's Deborah Oswald.
Yeah, I was going to... Yes, Deborah. Deborah talks about being from Thrace in a sackcloth, going to Rome. So she feels like they're going to London. Well, I suppose, look, sometimes I just wonder how it happens, you know. I mean, there's a variety of ways, and like how does people in Kabul or in Afghanistan or whatever find out about Tom's plays or Sweden? I mean, there's you can have an agent here, go over and talk to other agents and meet with production companies. Of course, playwrights can just do it themselves. And then there's the establishment potentially of agents there who are actually looking after your works and selling those works on the ground, be it London, Rome, New York. I mean, I find New York very tricky to get an Australian plays up.
What about more broadly, like the world's opened up, hasn't it? What about China and places like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, China's showing more interest, and the Beijing People's Arts Theatre has been out here recently, and they're talking to companies and agencies and talking to us about our clients, and they're a huge company, and wanting to put on, and they have a big international festival. So it's curious.
They did rock up at Belvoir saying, "Would you be interested in reviving Cloud Street?"
Yeah, right.
It's like, there's a bit of a catch up.
Yeah. There is a bit of a catch up.
What about the
right.
marketplaces? You've been to a marketplace, haven't you, Jane?
I haven't been specifically, but Mogollon this year pitched at the International Performing Arts Society, ISPA, in New York, and they get 200 applicants for a 10-minute pitch, 7-minute pitch and 3 minutes of Q&A. And they were one of 10 organisations that were, permitted to pitch. And so there was interest from, again, Sweden, the UK, Canada, US, in the visitors. And so, that's great for a company like Mogollon, reaching a broader worldwide audience.
And the importance of publication, really. I mean, we're at the Currency Festival. I mean, it makes a big difference, just the availability of the plays.
Yep.
And having someone interested to translate the plays in different territories and how they come upon the play. Right. Obviously, through the publication usually. I mean, yes, they might read reviews, etc., or have a particular interest in Australian theatre. Occasionally, you come across someone in, Peru. I was dealing with someone who was just obsessed with Australian theatre. And it was great. This young woman had read all this work, but I don't know how she, what sparked her interest. But so you just come across these advocates.
So it's about individuals and relationships.
Well, very often I find it's about individuals' relationships, forming a connection with a company or a literary manager or an artistic director that you can continue to send works to and will actually take them seriously. And then that stage from there to actually being programmed and produced is quite another step. But
and government help too. I mean, I've just joined a board, Writing Australia, the new initiative from Creative Australia, and I remind writers just to particularly look at the literature board at Creative Australia. I mean, they're very practiced at both the promotion of Australian works in publishing abroad, but also supporting translations. But that is open to playwrights as well to check out those grants that are available as well. We are lucky in that way that there is subsidy, and it's part of the kind of, it's a soft diplomacy as well, I guess, for the country. So we should not forget to check out that, ask for more.
I mean, so often too, it seems to be just the individual relationship of a playwright with a company overseas that gets a relationship going.
I would also caution, and again, like everything I say, it should be taken with a fair bit of salt, but don't look to the old imperial centres of cultural hegemony.
Yes.
New York, London, Los Angeles are dead zones. They are marketplaces, so there's a lot of trading going on there, but not much of any genuine worth or merit is actually genuinely produced. It sounds bizarre, but but we still inherit from our grandparents the idea that that's the actual centre of some kind of notional culture. The vast majority of my work now that I get, and I'm lucky enough to write for, never sees Australian stages, but Seoul for me is Seoul, right. Copenhagen, Zagreb, Johannesburg. These are the cities of the future, and the cities beyond that, Cairo, Lagos, Sao Paulo. This is where the stories and the energy of global theatre making is going to take place. And if Australia and Australian writers are smart, they'll educate themselves about these places and not get caught up in the commodification of their art form.
We'll send some emails on Monday, Anthony.
How are they finding your work in all these places?
I'm a bit different. I mean, I take your point completely, and thank goodness in for overseas point of view, being published by Nick Hearn Books was enormously useful. But on a secondary level for me, most people find out about my work through the internet, through other productions, and they say, I heard about this play called The True History of the Elephant Man, done by disabled performers, and then they look it up, and then they get the script. Very rarely is my work produced based on a cold read.
We're up to the point where we're going to take some questions from the audience. Am I doing that right? I hope so. Oh, yes. Here we go.
Here they come.
Do you adapt to the country at all, especially any very niche Aussie Indigenous references or language? Once you go there, Jane.
So visitors just had a reading in New Zealand, and they did adapt the first part because the latest production has quite a lot of Indigenous language to begin the play, and so they did adapt that for a Maori audience and some of the animal references as well. And so, you know, again, I'm really happy for that to happen.
Yeah, I always think it's within degrees. There are some times when, like, say, I've had productions in America, they want to translate something for them. And I'm like, we do it the other way all the time, particularly when it's about something quite obscene. I'm kind of like, no, learn what cracking a fat means. Go on. You know. Adopt it. It's useful. Okay, next question. Smooth. What excites you most about global theatre making? Where do you go, Tom?
The most exciting thing about global theatre making is that it teaches us in Australia that we like to think we've got a diversified form of theatre, but actually we're like artists who only paint in burnt umber. The range of what we do, what I mean is the difference from one production to another is frankly so minor that it just is kind of betrays our lack of imagination. When you do genuinely go to global theatre, like if you go to Kanakata and you see the kind of traditional forms and the way they're intersecting with contemporary practice, you know, long theatre, short theatre, silly theatre, bold theatre, community theatre, intellectual theatre, but theatre doesn't have to be people in a room talking about their feelings.
Yes.
It's a big thing, and global theatre teaches us this. The communal aspect is the key, not the power structures that are replicated on stage.
Yeah, and that's so interesting, isn't it? Like the processes, the style of theatre can be so different. But I also love, from my international contact with other theatre makers, is sometimes then boiling it down and finding that there is a key principle that is the same. Though I think of it being at a conference with a German playwright who was, you know, the type of theatre he was making felt so extremely different. But when I asked him why we make theatre, he said it's so we can love each other better. Yeah. And I loved hearing that. It's always stayed with me. Okay.
I find that too. I find when you meet other theatre artists from all around the world from a variety of circumstances, third, first, or whatever the hell constitutes the second world, the reason for making it is nearly always pretty similar.
Yes. Yeah. Our next question. I feel like a game show host.
Can I, while that one comes
Yeah.
up, can I answer the previous one?
Yeah.
You know, that question about do you alter your works?
Yeah.
When Picnic at Hanging Rock adaptation was first done in London, they said, would you mind if we just changed the first word? Because I'd written Victoria floats on a layer of scum.
Uh-huh.
And they said, would you mind if we just put it as Australia floats on this, because we don't want to think that you're disparaging our late Queen.
And what did you say?
Of course, go for it. Yeah. Australia floats on a layer of scum, it's a better start anyway.
What do you foresee in Australia's future with theatre in the Asia Pacific? Jane, do you want to take that one?
Again, I think, you know, the interest in particularly Indigenous stories is, you know, growing in particularly places like India and hopefully places like China as well. And again, I think it, even though they might not have a direct experience of colonisation or, you know, not every Indigenous play needs to be about colonisation or stolen generations. They can be about anything, you know, of course, the lived experience. But I think, you know, that there's great opportunities. I think for Indigenous theatre, it's always different because we want Indigenous actors to perform it. So that means touring that production rather than having it picked up by you know, a company in Germany or Copenhagen or wherever, and running it as their own. But
are you finding, Anthony, that engagement is growing?
Yes, I am. Certainly, well, with New Zealand and with China and even interest in Indonesia. I mean, I'd love there to be more two-way action, really. But yeah, I think it's slowly growing.
Again, the question is what constitutes the Asia Pacific? There's a massive difference between taking theatre or what theatre means in Manila to what it means in Singapore. And we've got to be careful not to sort of just broadly say that there's this sort of uniform thing. And I'm particularly interested in the second word, Pacific, because the relationship to rising sea levels in societies such as Tuvalu and Tokau and so on mean that the business of constructing communities and saving and rebuilding communities is going to be a vital part of Australia's ongoing cultural interaction with that part of the world. So yes, whatever it is, it's going to be about our First Nation stories though, because fundamentally what those of us who aren't First Nations have to say is pretty much reproducible, and others can do it just as well. But no one can tell Australian First Nation stories apart from First Nations people. It's our great, great brand, and we have to follow their leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Should Australian policymakers and funders, or even the taxpayer, care about international success in stage and screen? I would say absolutely. Anyone else want to pick that up?
I'm just interested in the distinction, policymakers and funders, or even the taxpayer.
Well, we do at the moment. I mean, there is a lot of subsidy that's happening in the way that we engage with the arts broadly.
Yeah, but there's an interesting question. Like, it's a really valid question to say, should funding bodies or the taxpayer look after your local theatre or your local symphony orchestra or whatever like that? Well, then we've had that debate over and over again, and there's a variety of opinions. But should we be funding external work, taking Australia to the world? That is a more interesting moot point, I think, because there are elements. Well, look, again, speaking on behalf of our company,
we're going to do it for trade. We're going to do it for beef and lobsters or whatever. So why wouldn't we be doing it with this other giant part of our economy, but also for the soft diplomacy part of it, but also for the cultural exchange that comes with it?
What do you think?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Well, don't really.
Well, no, I'm just cynical about it, but I'm not saying no. I'm just suggesting that. Look, all right. This is anecdotally. I can remember when I was working at the Sydney Theatre Company, and a production of Hedda Gabler, European classic, was taken to Washington, and because Kate Blanchett was in it, so obviously there was a great deal of interest, and the embassy was all over it. My goodness, they were so happy. They came up afterwards to the Sydney Theatre Company staff and were saying, we've had access to people, particularly people from the Pentagon, who we haven't been able to get hold of for years, and suddenly they want to come because their spouse wants to meet
Bit of glamour.
Meet Kate Blanchett. And they said, can you bring more productions like this? What about Nicole Kidman? Could she come? And as a theatre maker and a sort of a precious lefty, I'm going, oh God, look what's happened. We've been colonised again.
Right.
This isn't about theatre. This is all about doors and flutes of champagne and fancy rooms. And far be it for me to sneer, we all need to draw a paycheck, but I lost interest at that point.
Do you want to pick that up, Anthony?
Yeah, I'm not so interested in all that red carpet ready stuff. Everyone's obsessed with it.
Right.
And I know I'm in the industry of it, but whether they should care, I don't know whether taxpayers should really care. I mean, it just feels this sort of cringe about, the world, cares about what we do and think. I don't know. There's
Well, I want my taxpayer dollars spent that way.
Yeah.
I'm
not saying it's a terrible thing. Of course it's a good thing, but whether they should care, I don't know.
We're going to run out of time, but is there maybe one more question? I don't know if there is, but I want to take the opportunity of saying thank you to Currency Press for organising this event. I know that a huge amount of planning goes into such a thoughtful, considerate program and bringing us together. It's clearly a gap that we all feel, that these opportunities for a sense of belonging are so valuable. So thank you to Deborah and Claire and Jodine and everyone that has put so much effort into the occasion. It's an honour to be the first panel today. Thank you so much to our panellists. Give them a round of applause. And have a great festival. Enjoy yourselves. Thank you.